Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Spinner of Yarns, a channel that is dedicated to stories. The hopes is that eventually this channel will develop into a place where authors of all sorts can share their works and promote them in a way that will not only be cost effective to them, but can possibly give them the exposure that they normally wouldn't get. But until that happens, I will be sharing with you pieces of my own work. I am a published author. And you can find my works on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Mainly it is sci-fi, fantasy, things like that. But without further ado, let's get into this because I know y'all came here looking for a story. So I'm going to be sharing with you a book I wrote called Blood of the Wolf. And we shall start now with Chapter 1, Home is Where the Heart Is. Cut, cut, cut! Michael threw up his hands in frustration as he turned to leave the room. He had been spending years pouring his heart and soul into his music, and he was beginning to feel like he was the only one that cared. He always expected 110% from himself, and only expected those around him to try their best, or what he believed to be their best. He always tried to make them believe they could do better, but it was beginning to wear him quite thin. His father had instilled in him at an early age that he had to be the best and nothing less would be acceptable. Hearing this all his life set him up to have certain pet peeves when he associated with other people. One of those things was expecting the same out of everyone else that he or his father expected out of him. Michael was sitting on his bed with his head on his hands when Lisa walked in, upset and a bit concerned at the way he had treated everybody. What gives, Michael? Everyone's given it their all in there, especially Alan, which is a lot to be expected out of anyone that just went through what he did. I mean, with his mother dying and all. Not to mention he's been forced to move in here since he has no place else to go. It was either that or become the custody of the state. He still has a few months before he turns 18. The least you could do is be a little considerate towards the way he's feeling at the moment. I mean, shit, the guy's like a fucking brother to you. He'd take a bullet for you if need be. All right, Lisa, enough with the lecturing. I feel bad enough as is. I had no right to explode on him, and I know it. I just haven't been getting any sleep at all lately. I've been noticing that. What gives? Like, you don't get nervous enough that your mom's going to hear me every night when I sneak in. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love getting my face shoved in the pillow while you fuck my brains out. But you've been a lot more on edge than usual lately. Michael sighed with frustration and a bit of hesitation toward speaking about what he has on his mind. It's those visions. They've come back lately. And they're more intense than they ever were before. I feel like I'm going out of my mind. They hit me even when I'm awake now. What, you mean those end-of-the-world visions again? I thought you said they were gone. They were, at least for a while. But they're back now. I mean, man, are they back. I think that I was just suppressing them for a while, but so much for that. We better not let your dad find out. Those visions are the reason he put you in therapy in the first place. Hell, your mother even broke up with him over his reaction towards you in those visions. Well, that on top of his religious meltdown and the slut he was fucking. Michael laughed as he said it. Hey, I'm a slut. She was a whore. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. Lisa walked over and sat down on Michael's lap, grinding her ass into his crotch, which is more than enough distraction for any man. Well, what do you say I help take your mind off those visions a little later? Michael took a deep breath in excitement, raised an eyebrow in intrigue at the offer. Sounds good to me. I could go for a little workout. Lisa laughed. I'll bet you could. But you better go talk to Alan before I release the beast, because I'm going to put you to work. You might be at it all night. Michael raised an eyebrow again. It's not a good way to convince me to talk to Alan. Lisa laughed as she stood up and turned around to pull Michael up off the bed. Go. I'll still be here when you get back. Michael found Alan sitting out on the deck sipping a Pepsi and wiping the tears from his eyes. Alan had a look of anticipation mixed with irritation on his face. He rolled his eyes and looked away when he saw Michael coming, as if he had been wondering when he would show his face again. So, you threw me in an asshole yet, or should I give you more time? I guess I deserve that. Listen, man, I'm sorry for the way I acted in there. I had no right to go off on you like I did. I've just been on edge lately. It has nothing to do with you or the band. We all want to make it just as bad. So you admit you're a dick. Alan had a smirk as he said this. I wouldn't go that far, but I probably resemble something of the penile variety right now. Apology accepted as long as you can admit you're a dick. Lisa walked out just in time to hear what Alan said. No, he has a dick, and quite a monster, I might add. She walked up, put her arms around Michael, and grabbed his crotch. Alan looked away, putting his hands up in front of him as if to obstruct his view. Get a room, you two. They both laughed. Lisa smiled as she looked at the two of them. Sorry, I couldn't help but eavesdrop. I hate to see you two fight. You guys are so close. I get jealous sometimes of how close you guys are. I don't think you have to worry about him running away with me. I don't swing that way. His ass is off limits, big boy. I've seen what you're packing. Then he looked over at Lisa with sick curiosity written all over his face. How do you take that thing? I take it hard and fast and love every minute. She said this quite dramatically as she rubbed her ass on Michael's crotch again. It's beginning to get Michael a little hot under the collar. So he grabbed her hair, pulling her head backwards as he kissed her lips and bit her neck. She squirmed a little in excitement. Keep that up and I'll do you right here with Alan watching. I'm game. Hell, I'll even videotape. I'll call it the massacre of Lisa's ass. He said this as he stared off into space and held his hands in front of him like he could see the billboard. It made Michael and Lisa laugh a little. Suddenly they heard Michael's mother, Angela, in the doorway, clearing her throat to get their attention. It's bad enough I can hear you two at night. Do you have to describe it so graphically? Alan smiled from ear to ear because he had seen her standing there the whole time. Hi, Mom. He smiled and waved at Angela. He had come to consider her to be his second mom. Michael and Lisa turned to look with shocked expressions on their faces. Mom, how long have you been standing there? I've been here long enough to know more than I wanted to about my son's sex life. Mom, I can explain. Lisa just stood behind Michael looking embarrassed and in shock, her face getting redder by the moment. Explain what? You're 18. I figured you started having sex a couple years ago. Alan chimed in. It's been 3 to be exact. Michael's eyes got wide as his face showed his embarrassment. Lisa's just buried her face in Michael's back. If she could have crawled inside his shirt and hid from sight, she would have. Angela smiled sarcastically at Alan as if to say this, his input wasn't really needed. Thank you, Alan. No problem, Mom. Nevertheless, I don't care as long as you're careful. That's why I told your father to buy you those condoms. Michael looked at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mom, that was your idea? I had to listen to a 3-hour lecture on how much of a sin premarital sex is. I mean, the guy's a priest, for God's sake. Angela dismissed Michael's comment with a gesture of her hand. That's beside the point. I'm also worried about Lisa's parents finding out. I mean, you both are so young. Lisa's embarrassment had begun to subside as she peeked out from behind Michael. I talk to them about it all the time. If you think we're bad, you should listen to my mom and dad go at it. Michael winced a bit in mental agony at the thought of that image. Angela softly chuckled as she turned around to head into the house, waving for everyone to follow her inside. Well, dinner's ready if you guys are hungry. And remember not to stay up too late. You have school in the morning. That's mainly directed towards the two of you. She said this, pointing at Michael and Lisa. Oh, by the way, Lisa, you're welcome to spend the night, considering you're probably just going to sneak into Michael's room anyway. Angela said this with definite sarcasm in her voice. Michael and Lisa just stared at each other for a second, then shook their head and walked inside, trying to forget that whole scene just took place. The rest of the guys of the band had left at this point. They didn't feel like sticking around after Michael put on his diva exhibition, as they put it. Michael knew he would have some explaining to do tomorrow, when he got to school, but tonight he just felt like relaxing with his family and being close to the woman he loved so much. After dinner, Michael and Alan sat down in the living room working on some of the music. Michael sang while Alan played the acoustic. Lisa just sat cross-legged on the floor and stared at the two of them in awe. When they really got into it, their music was almost legendary. Angela smiled every once in a while as she looked over in Michael's direction and caught the look on Lisa's face. She knew they were in love, and she knew that Lisa made her son very happy. She just worried about him sometimes. There were things she knew about the conditions revolving around his conception that she hadn't even discussed with him yet. And with the reoccurrence of Michael's visions, lately she worried that the day when she would have to tell him was drawing near. She hadn't even told him that being psychic ran in the family, and she could only imagine how amplified those abilities could be, considering the secret she was keeping from him. How was she going to tell him that he wasn't fully human? In fact, she didn't even know for sure how much of him was, except for his outer appearance, that is. As she thought about it, she began remembering the night she was abducted. She was heading home from work on a dark country road. Cars were speeding by her in the opposite direction, with the drivers honking their horns and yelling at her to turn around. She paid no attention to them as she continued towards home. She figured they were just a bunch of drunken kids on a joyride messing with her. As she came out into a clearing, she could see lights in the sky. They were hovering around in strange patterns, and it looked like they were getting closer. All of a sudden, the lights became so blinding, she could barely see, and then she passed out. When she awoke, she found herself strapped to a table, naked with only a sheet covering her. She looked up to see what she thought to be two werewolves standing on either side of her, in lab coats. Another wolf in a lab coat approached her with a strange cylindrical object filled with fluid and began to stick it between her legs. She started to struggle, but as she did, she felt two paws hold her down, a white one and a black one. They were from the wolves on either side of her. As she felt the object penetrate her, she began to cry out, "Why?" The white wolf simply looked down and smiled a wolfish grin, which was more than just a bit disturbing to Angela. The wolf never spoke, but Angela could hear her voice in her mind. "It's going to be okay, child. You've been given a responsibility and a gift. The child inside you is special, and he will grow to save the world someday. It is your job to protect him until the time is right." The white wolf placed her paw on Angela's forehead, and as she did, a feeling of unbelievable peace came over her, just before passing back out. Angela awoke to find herself back in her car on the side of the road. When she looked at her watch, she noticed 5 hours had passed, and it was now 3 in the morning. She was very groggy and couldn't remember a whole lot, but she saw 7 lights rising into the sky until they were out of sight. She wondered if it had all happened, at least the bits and pieces she could remember, or had it all just been a dream. She couldn't stop thinking about it as she continued the drive back to her house. When she got home, her husband, Matt, was waiting up for her. He didn't even give her a chance to explain. He just started yelling at her the moment she came through the door. "Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. I tried calling the office and there was no answer. I called your parents and they didn't know where you were. Your mother is freaking out." Angela started crying because the emotional pain she was feeling was only worsened by her husband's comments. He couldn't even begin to understand how frightened she was after everything that had happened, and it seemed like he didn't even care. She could tell he'd been drinking again, which always made him more impossible to deal with. "God damn it, answer me! Are you cheating on me? Have you been fucking somebody behind my back?" The accusation quickly shocked Angela out of the zone she was in. She couldn't believe he could be so heartless and ask her a question like that, especially after what just had happened. Even if he didn't believe her, he had to know how much she did and how hard she worked. She screamed back at him with tears welling up in her eyes. "No! My God, how could you think something like that? I love you. Haven't I proved that to you enough?" Angela was a very devout Catholic, and Matt was the first and only man she had ever been with. So this cut her very deeply. It was almost more than she could handle with everything else going on in her mind. But he just continued to yell at her. "Well, then where have you been? I don't know what happened. One minute I was on my way home, and the next minute I woke up in my car on the side of the road, and it was 5 hours later. What are you trying to tell me, that aliens abducted you? Now come on, Angela, if you're going to lie to me, at least make it better than that." It wasn't a lie, but how was she going to convince him? Even she thought she was crazy. "I'm not lying to you. Why won't you trust me?" Angela ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. She called her mom to let her know she was all right. Her mother was a bit more understanding, but she was still a little worried about Angela's inability to account for the 5 hours she was on the side of the road. Matt slept on the couch that night, which only furthered the hurt Angela was feeling. She laid in bed sobbing until she finally cried herself to sleep. The next morning, when she woke up, she ran to the bathroom to throw up, and she couldn't hold anything down throughout the day. This continued for almost a week, until she had finally had enough and went to see her doctor. He gave her the news she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. It was morning sickness. She was pregnant. When she got home, She let Matt know the news, but he didn't take it so well. It just started another argument. Whose is it? Angela looked at Matt in disbelief, wondering how he could be so cold. She screamed back at him, "It's yours, damn it! I haven't been sleeping with anyone but you!" "That's impossible. I've been using the rhythm method." "Well, I guess your rhythm was off." Her last comment infuriated Matt. What scared Angela? She didn't think he would get violent, but at this point she didn't know what he was capable of. He screamed back at her with so much anger and hatred in his voice. "That's it! I don't want anything more to do with you or your little accident." Matt left, slamming the front door behind him, and only came back to get his belongings a few days later. Angela moved back in with her parents out of desperation because she would need all the help she could get now that she was pregnant. Her mother and father graciously welcomed her back with open arms. They never cared for Matt too much. This only fueled their animosity towards him. They knew their daughter was an honest and faithful woman because they raised her well. They couldn't believe he would accuse her of any infidelities. Angela's pregnancy was a rough one. The morning sickness continued throughout the entire 9 months, which left her in a much weakened state. However, through it all, she still managed to keep her job as a secretary for an insurance company. She knew her child would need at least one responsible parent in its life. So no matter how hard it got, she still pressed on. Surprisingly, 3 months before Angela was to give birth, Matt called her. He said he was sorry for the way he had acted and wanted her back. He said he wanted a paternity test, and if it turned out to be his, he'd take full responsibility. Angela accepted his terms, much to the dismay of her parents. But she had no intention of being a single mother, if she didn't have to. The birth was very difficult. It got so bad at one point that her doctor told her she'd have to choose between her life and the life of her child. Angela chose her child's life over her own. But luckily, at the last minute, the doctor was able to save them both. The paternity test results came through and revealed that Matt was the father, much to the relief and confusion of Angela. Had she just imagined all the events of that night? This question stayed with her, and she couldn't shake it until one night, about 3 years later, when Michael came running into her room and told her that he woke up and wolves that walked like people surrounded his bed. He said they looked like ghosts. He even said one of them looked at him and talked, but he could only hear her in his head. "Mommy, she said welcome." What did she mean? Angela just looked at him in shock. It was all true. It must have happened. How else could Michael have experienced something so similar? Matt just groaned as he looked at the clock. "Go back to bed. It's 3 a.m. and I need to get up for work in a few hours." Angela took Michael back to his room to tuck him in. As she was laying him down, she noticed that something had changed. Michael's beautiful aqua blue eyes he had since he was born were now a golden yellow, just like a wolf's eyes. Angela stared into them for a while, wondering why they would have changed color, but she shook her head and figured it was probably nothing. But what if? Michael stood in front of his mom, and he could notice that she wasn't paying attention to him. She was just looking off into space, and nothing he said or did seemed to be getting her attention. "Mom?" Michael put his hand on her shoulder and shook her a bit to get her attention. "Mom, are you all right?" Angela snapped out of it to see Michael staring at her. "Huh? Oh, yes, Mike. I'm sorry. I was just lost in thought." "Was there something you wanted?" Michael looked down at her with a little concern on his face. "I was saying good night. It's 9 o'clock, so we're heading off to bed." "Oh, good night, honey. I love you." Michael leaned in and gave her a hug and a kiss goodnight. "I love you too, Mom. I'll see you in the morning. You sure you're all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. I've just got a lot on my mind." Alan and Lisa waved from the entrance to the hallway. "Good night, Alan. Good night, Lisa." As soon as the door closed to Michael's room, Lisa jumped on him like a hungry animal. He fell backwards onto the bed, not expecting to get tackled from behind. He couldn't believe how excited she was. They didn't have to sneak around anymore because his mom already knew. As they rolled around on the bed, kissing and groping each other, Lisa looked into his eyes with a vicious expression on her face. Fuck me. Hard. Wide-eyed and eager to fulfill her every command, he frantically began tearing off his clothes, as she did the same to her own. They went at each other like wild beasts for well over an hour. After they were finished, Lisa laid there on the bed with her arm and leg draped over him, trying to recover from the most intense session of sex they had ever had. She was physically exhausted and a bit sore. She got exactly what she was asking for, but she was glad it was the time for some rest. Much more of that, and she wasn't going to be walking the next day. She almost wasn't sure she was going to be able to anyway. That was fucking awesome. Where'd that come from? You haven't fucked me that hard the entire time we've been together. I don't know what brought it out, but I hope it stays out. Michael smiled. Maybe it's just because I have nothing to hide anymore. Maybe my mom already knows. Lisa just shrugged her shoulders with a look of contentment. Then she snuggled in close and held Michael tightly, as he did the same to her. They said their goodnights and drifted off to sleep. Unfortunately, it wasn't as good of a night as Michael had hoped it would be. The visions that had plagued his dreams for so long were back. Every time they thought they couldn't get any worse, they proved him wrong. He just hoped that one day it would all make sense. As he faded off into sleep, the dreams began like they did every other night prior. He found himself walking downtown at night, the regular urchins roaming the streets. Spare change, spare change. Hey, you got a nickel? I know you do. Michael tried to avoid them as the best he could. He saw some gang members raping a woman off in an alley, some others carjacking a guy across the street. The police just rolled by like they didn't see any of it happening, or maybe they just didn't care. He'd come to expect that in his dreams, and in the real world. Michael shook his head at the inhumanity of it all. Then, just like in all of Michael's other dreams, the ground began to shake. It continued as Michael looked off towards the northwest sky, which was always where it came from. There it was, the wave of fire, washing through the streets, disintegrating everything in its path. The closer it came to Michael, the more he could feel the heat from it swathing his body. Just then it washed right over him, but to his disbelief, it did nothing to him. He was fine. But everything around him was on fire. All the buildings looked like twisted monstrosities. He could smell burning flesh, and he could hear the screams of a few that had survived. Now a new addition had come to his dream, something Michael had not expected. He heard marching as he began to see soldiers in skull-faced helmets filling the streets. Survivors were running for their lives, and the soldiers were killing them in cold blood. He saw black-winged angels and demons running rampant, adding themselves to the hunt. It was also horrifying, but Michael couldn't turn away even if he wanted to. He heard a deep voice, almost a growl behind him as something placed a paw on his shoulder. Sickening, isn't it? He looked over to see a black wolf standing next to him. Michael tried to turn and run, but his legs wouldn't move. Just then he remembered the dream of the wolves surrounding his bed, from when he was a boy. At least he thought it was a dream. The wolf looked down into Michael's eyes with a supreme knowing that terrified and comforted him all at the same time. The wolf continued to speak. The time of the awakening is almost upon you, my son. Mankind has come to a point of no return, a deep pit of despair it can't pull itself out of. What you are seeing here is a glimpse of the things to come. It may be too late to stop it, but it's not too late to save humanity, to save the children of Gaia. The power is within you, boy. You and those like you. It is time for you to awaken. Suddenly, the black wolf began shaking Michael with his massive paw. In the next video will be awakenings. Well, guys, if you like what you've heard so far, please do hit the subscribe button down below, like this video, hit the bell for the notifications so you'll know when the next one comes out. Going to be coming out with these, at least one a week, but to get things moving, I'll be adding more chapters to this throughout this week. So you'll definitely have more to listen to in the coming days. So yeah, stay tuned and enjoy the story as it progresses. All right, guys. Take care. I'll see you soon.